the Science Guy.
Bill Nye, the Science Guy.
Bill Nye, the Science Guy.
Science rules.
Bill Nye, the Science Guy.
Oh. The purpose of this investigation was to figure out whether the copper placed in a solution of silver nitrate produced copper 1 or copper 2 ions. For this ion to be formed, an ionic compound, which is a compound composed of ions bound together by electrostatic forces, was needed. In this investigation, silver nitrate served as the ionic compound. A typical chemical reaction with silver suspends a wire of copper in a solution of silver nitrate. The copper was left in the solution without disturbances, and after a few hours the copper oxidized, which means that there was a loss of electrons, and that led to the reduction, which is the gain of electrons, of silver. From this, crystals of silver metal formed along the surface of the copper wire. The balanced single replacement equation is shown as 2AgNO3 plus Cu yields CuNO32 plus 2Ag. In this equation, nitrate is a spectator ion, which is an ion that does not take part in a reaction. In the investigation, if copper is reacted with silver nitrate, then copper 2 ions will be produced because oxidation of the copper and reduction of the silver takes place, resulting in a gain of copper electrons.
Ready? Cool. You start. Throughout this investigation, a copper wire was submerged into a solution of silver nitrate and left for 24 hours for observation. The purpose was to determine whether copper 1 ions or copper 2 ions would be produced after the copper wire submerged in the solution. After about 15 minutes as the wire was engulfed in the solution, it was noticed that the wire started to rust and blacken, and the solution itself started to become opaque. And after further observation for 24 hours, the copper wire formed silver crystals and the solution had a bluish tint to it as well. The analysis done after the collection of crystals showed that the ratio of silver to copper was 2:1, which means that the wire submerged in the solution of silver nitrate reacted to produce copper 2 ions because for every 2 atoms of silver, there was 1 atom of copper that was used. The predicted amount of silver was 0.068 grams as opposed to what was actually produced, 0.09 grams. This created a percent error of 32%.
The materials needed are approximately 6-inch piece of copper wire, 30 milliliters of 0.10 molar silver nitrate, also known as AgNO3, 2 250 milliliter beakers, 1 600 milliliter beakers, 1 digital scale, 1 glass test tube, parafilm, 1 pipette, 1 stirring rod, labeling tape, 1 DH2O water wash bottle, acetone, test tube rack, drying oven.
This is the procedure. On day 1, get the piece of copper wire and the clean dry test tube. 2. Find the separate mass of the copper wire, separate mass of the 250 milliliter beaker, and the combined mass of the copper wire and the 250 milliliter beaker. Record your results and round the measurements to the nearest hundredths. 3. Create a coil shape with the copper wire by wrapping it around a pencil or a pen. Stretch the coil out a little so that it can be placed in the test tube. Step 4. Pour the 30 milliliter of 0.10 molar silver nitrate into the test tube. Step 5. Place the coiled copper wire into the test tube containing 0.10 silver nitrate and make sure the coil is fully submerged. Record the reaction that occurs after and observations regarding the solution and the copper wire. Step 6. Use the parafilm to cover the test tube and let the reaction continue to occur for 24 hours. Day 2. Step 1. Use the 600 milliliter beaker as a container for waste. Step 2. Shake the crystals that have formed on the copper wire using a stirring rod. Then, remove the copper wire from the test tube. You can use the stirring rod to pull it out after all the crystals have been removed. Step 3. Use the wash bottle to rinse the wire in the first 250 milliliter beaker. Step 4. Dip the copper wire in acetone, then set it aside to dry. Step 5. Find and record the mass of the dried copper wire to the nearest hundredth of a gram. Step 6. Decant the solution from the silver crystals into the 250 milliliter beaker using a pipette. Step 7. Rinse the silver with 10 milliliters of distilled water while gently stirring the rod. Step 8. Allow the silver to settle and then decant into the second 250 milliliter beaker. Repeat this process 3 more times. Make sure to discard the liquid from the 600 milliliter waste beaker into a proper disposal unit. Step 9. The final solid should be in a 250 milliliter beaker. After the final rinse, place the 250 milliliter beaker into the drying oven, then clean and dry the waste beaker. Day 3. Step 1. When the silver is dry, bind the mass of the silver to the nearest hundredth. These are the physical observations with chemical explanations. First, the solution appeared clear and the copper wire looked normal. This was because the copper atoms in the silver nitrate solution had just been submerged. Then, the copper color of the wire turned black. This was because the copper atoms had oxidized. Then, the wire looked fuzzy and crystals began to form on the wire. This was because the number of silver ions were reduced. Lastly, the solution turned blue, and this indicated the presence of Cu2 plus ions and NO3 minus ions in the solution. This is the raw mass data table. The mass of the copper wire before the reaction was 1.13 grams. The mass of the empty labeled 250 milliliter beaker was 34.9 grams. The mass of the beaker and the copper wire was 111.50 grams. The mass of the copper wire after the reaction was 1.11 grams, and the mass of the beaker with dry silver crystals was 35.07 grams, and the mass of silver crystals was 0.09 grams. The analysis table is as followed. The calculations are as followed. The balanced equation that is representative of this investigation is 2AgNO3 plus Cu yields CuNO3 2 plus 2Ag. Within this equation, the copper represents the component that went through the oxidization, which is the loss of electrons. This is because copper 2 ions were produced, which have a 2 plus charge, meaning a loss of 2 electrons. The presence of the copper 2 ions was indicated by the blue color of the substance. The silver represents the component that went through reduction as a result from the oxidization. Due to the oxidation of the copper wire, the lost electrons are gained by the silver, also known as reduction. This produces silver crystals and copper 2 ions. The nitrate was a spectator ion in the reaction and throughout the investigation, as it remained unchanged after the chemical reaction.
The purpose of this investigation is to find out whether copper wire reacted with silver nitrate would produce copper 1 ions or copper 2 ions. When the copper wire was submerged into silver nitrate solution, the wire immediately started to react and resulted in a fuzzy substance, and after a while, a blue solution. The fuzzy substance was then left for another 24 hours and turned into silver crystals. This is because the copper wire goes through oxidization and silver goes through reduction. The conclusion drawn from this investigation was that copper wire produces copper 2 ions, which proves the hypothesis correct. This is because the solution turned blue, which indicated the presence of copper 2 ions. Some of the human errors that could have occurred during this investigation are accidentally removing some of the silver substance from the beaker with a pipette while extracting the liquid from the beaker, measuring incorrect amounts of substances, or spilling liquid while removing the beaker, causing the formation of silver crystals to loosen up. Some of the experimental errors that could have occurred during this investigation were the balance not functioning properly, resulting in incorrect data, or technological equipment problems. Any of these errors could have caused a greater percentage of error, which was 32%. This copper-silver nitrate reaction is involved in oxidation, and reduction is applicable to real life. For example, oxidation and reduction is a huge part of what contributes to how food spoils. Oxidation is responsible for spoiling of the food, while preservatives often act as a reducing agent to slow down the spoiling process. In addition, oxidation is believed to be part of aging process, and antioxidants that are recommended to slow down the process commonly contain reducing agents.
Bill, 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 Bill. Bill, the science